So what exactly is up with Greek accents, and why don't they seem to make any real sense? Even people who say they understand Greek accents don't really understand them. They just are really familiar with the rules and comfortable with accepting the rules. But if you try and get them to explain how it all works together as a system, it seems to be kind of impossible. And there's a reason for that, and the reason is that we've been explaining them to you and to students for hundreds and hundreds of years in a really poor way. So here's the basic problem. The basic problem, well, let's use the analogy of the old rabbit-duck illusion from the late 19th century. Now, it's an image that is specifically designed to look like a rabbit from one perspective, like a duck from another perspective, and sort of both. If you think about the whole image is both a rabbit and a duck. But now imagine you're trying to explain how this illusion works, and you're trying to explain it to someone who doesn't know what a duck is. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is, what if you decide to tie one arm behind your back, so to speak, and decide that you're not going to use the word duck at all? That would be really hard to explain to someone how this works, right? Well, that's what we do with Greek accentuation. So the traditional rules that we all learn in first year Greek or on our own if we're studying on our own, here is a representative version. This is Chandler's Practical Introduction to Greek Accentuation, also late 19th century, like the rabbit-duck illusion. But things haven't really changed. Almost any textbook will have some version of this. And if you look at it very closely, what you'll notice is that we base this on the description of syllables, and everything that's in an orange box is straightforwardly syllabic information. But it's actually containing hidden information about another aspect of Greek phonology, and that is the morae. And morae are rhythmic units of time based on a short vowel, in which a short vowel lasts one mora worth of time in a language. And so if you look, there is information about syllables straightforwardly, and then there's information about morae, kinds of accents, and whether a syllable is long or short. That's actually moraic information, but it's not presented to you as such. But here's the deal. To understand Greek accentuation, you have to understand that it's based on the organization of morae within syllables. It's not based just on morae, and it's not just based on syllables, rabbits and ducks. It's based on both. So there are only so many ways to organize the last two syllables in moraic terms or length terms. So remember, if a short vowel is one mora, then a long vowel is two morae, and there are only four word end shapes, and that is a long. You'll see I'm using the lowercase letter sigma to represent a syllable, and then I'm using subscript mus to show you the morae in them. So the shape on the left is two syllables with two long vowels, two double mora vowels. The next one is short long, the next one is short, and the next one is long short. Those are the only ways you can arrange long and short syllables into the last two syllables. There are really only two underlying accentual patterns here, believe it or not. And I know that this is never represented this way, but this is true, believe it or not. The three shapes on the left there, long, short, and short, have what I'm going to call a 3-2 pattern. And the last one, and only the last one, has a 4-3 pattern. Now, what do I mean by that? I know that you haven't heard it presented this way, so let me take a little bit of time to explain it. The numbers refer to the morae, where the high tone, remember the Greek accent is a pitch accent, and so it consists in the main, or so we typically present it, as a high tone. And the high tone is where the accent mark is, so we tend to think a lot about this. So it refers to the morae where the high tone can go, counting from the end of a word. So what I'm saying is that the first three shapes, they can have a high tone either on mora 3 or on mora 2. And I'm going to use the shorthand mu3 or mu2. That means mora 3 or mora 2. So the high tone can go either on 3 or 2, whereas in the 4-3 pattern, it can go either on 4 or 3. So let's deal with the 3-2 word shapes first. This is most words in Greek. It's the first three of those possible shapes. So the recessive position, the farthest back that an accent can go, a high tone can go, in these shapes is the 3, mora 3. And I've given you 3 examples, chora, logon, and apolis. And you will notice that in the last one, we didn't get to mora 3 with just the last 2 syllables, so I had to add another syllable to get you to mora 3. And I have made green mora 3. This is where the accent goes. And so that's it. Recessive accent on all of these patterns simply goes on mora 3. Meanwhile, there's an intermediate position that high tone can also go on, and that is 1 mora to the right, or mora 2. And this is what happens when a word has persistent accent and doesn't allow itself to go further back than the syllable where mora 2 is, or where mora 3 just doesn't exist. Again, down below, I have shown you the mora 2. This is the second or intermediate position for the high tone. And I've given you examples, both examples that have plenty of syllables and morae, and then examples where the word is just too short to have any longer mora. But the point is that we've got only 2 real possibilities here for these in terms of recessive intermediate accentuation. 4-3, you can probably guess the recessive position is at mora 4. Again, notice I've got to add another syllable here to get us to mora 4 in anthropos. And intermediate position, again, intermediate position is always 1 mora to the right of recessive position. So if recessive is mora 4, then intermediate is mora 3. And again, that's for persistent accents or words that don't have mora 4. And I've given you an example of each there, ekeinos and douron. And that's it. That's basically it. All word shapes in Greek also have the ability, and this is both 3-2 and 4-3, to have non-recessive, fully non-recessive accentuation. And all this means is that we pin a high tone onto the very last mora of the word, mora 1. And this always shows up as an acute on the ultima. So if you want to, you can think of them as 3-2-1 shapes or 4-3-1 shapes, but 1 is always a possibility. And I've given you some examples for each of the 4 shapes there. So why is this so hard to grasp? Well, 1, because it's not normally presented like this, and that's why I want to talk to you about it in these terms. If you look at it purely syllabically, we end up with a distinction between long ultimas and short ultimas. That is, ultimas with long vowels and ultimas with short vowels. We always have terminal accent, but if we put the accent on the last syllable, it gets complicated. Sometimes it's an acute, sometimes it's a circumflex, and sometimes you can't really have it at all because the circumflex can't go on a short vowel. When you get to the penult accent, well, the problem with it is that long ultimas and short ultimas don't divide off from each other. One of the scenarios with a short ultima actually patterns on in this way with the long ultimas by having an acute in the penult, whereas the other short ultima form, the 4-3 form, has a circumflex. And finally, you have antepenult accent, and we have short ultimas, and that's a rule that you all learn. The accent can only stand on the antepenult if the ultima is short, but they're actually representing 2 slightly different things. Alogos is a mora 3 high tone, and anthropos is a high tone on mora 4. If we think about the way it's normally presented, it's about the kind of accent that can go on what syllable. And when we do it that way, so this is probably how you learned these, although you didn't get it in this chart form, things are a little bit more complicated. And what you end up with is lots of gaps, which you then have to just explain away or say, just don't do it. And you also get weird divisions. You get, again, everything has a terminal ability that is an acute on the ultima, so all 4 forms sort of go together. But then you got circumflex on the ultima, only the long forms, great. Acute on the penult, well, to 2 long forms again, but also 1 short ultima form. And then the circumflex on the penult is only possible on the final, the 4-3 shape. And the acute on the penult, again, we have sort of both of them put there, even though they're slightly different. So what happens if we begin with a mora-based lens? And I think you'll be able to see visually that things are just really clean and neat, or at least cleaner and neater. And what we end up with is terminal tone available in all 4 shapes, and then the 3-2 shapes behave exactly alike, even though they don't necessarily look alike, if you're looking at mora. If you're looking at the mora situation, so kairon, hodon, and logos have different kinds of accentuation, but they're the same thing. They're mora 2 high tone. Similarly, chora, logon, and alogos, all mora 3 tone. along with ekainos, but we know why ekainos is doing something a little different because it's a different shape. And it is using its intermediate position in ekainos, whereas chora, logon, and alogos are using their recessive position. And then finally, we have anthropos down there, the 4-3 shape, and a mora 4 high tone. So you can just see that organizationally and conceptually, this is way clearer, and it makes a lot more sense. It would make even more sense if I wanted to take the time to show you what I actually can show you, believe it or not, which is that even though in this chart these things connected by arrows are on different lines and look different, in fact, what's actually happening is exactly the same thing. So we could clean this up by going one stage of magnification deeper into linguistics. We could actually show you how those lines actually line perfectly up, and exactly the same thing is going on in every single one of these shapes. In other words, behind 3-2 shapes and 4-3 shapes, there is actually a single shape happening, but that'll have to be saved for another video another time. So the upshot here, every single shape has 3 docking sites, which I'm going to refer to as recessive, intermediate, and terminal. Any individual word might be shorter than that, or it might have persistent accentuation, so it might not have R, it might not have recessive, it might only have intermediate and terminal docks, or it might just have a terminal dock. If it is only 1 syllable long, or if it is if it's just a word where the accent is limited to the ultima and the ultima has a short vowel. So over on the left, the 3-2 shapes. Over on the right, the 4-3 shape. And I've put R, I, and T above the respective morae, showing you where the 3 docking sites are. And then down below, I've shown you how these look on actual words of this shape. So you can follow along here, but doesn't this make so much more sense than the random collection of rules that you seem to learn about long and shorts and circumflexes and everything else? The key here is that you have to know what each accent mark represents. Every accent mark in Greek shows you exactly what mora in the word is getting the high tone. And as long as you know that, then thinking about Greek accentuation this way makes the whole thing come together in an actually coherent and somewhat explanatory way. So I hope that helps you if you've been struggling, or if you're just looking for further information. That's Greek accentuation for you.